This is the state of the world. Catalytic conversations with leaders who are reinventing the web and building trusted technologies for the future of humanity. Brought to you by EXO, the Internet of Impact.
Well, hello, Joe. It's really great to have you on the show today. And you and I get to speak really very frequently, but not so often in a focused catalytic conversation kind of way. And so today's really about taking 15 minutes just to, in a way, kind of pause and think about some of the bigger issues around what is the current state of the world and what are we doing about it, and what can other people take from this in terms of the kinds of questions and insights and actions that we can take to do things differently. So Joe, for starters, could you just give a short introduction to yourself?
Sure. First of all, it's great to be here, Sean. I am Joe Andrieu. I am the principal at Legendary Requirements. We are a requirements engineering firm focused on decentralized identity, which means adding, or let me say, using blockchain-based technologies to figure out how to restructure how society manages identity.
Great synopsis. Thank you, Joe. And you really are leading in some of the work around identity. You have been for many years, and it's been a great pleasure working with you from an EXO and Interchain perspective. So let's get straight to it. So when you woke up this morning, what was it that it was kind of, or is, top of your mind about the current state of the world? Really, this is I guess, a reflection on some of these tipping points that we don't always kind of see obviously, but if we stop to pause for a moment and think, yeah, actually there is something different, we can sometimes catch those tipping points before they catch us.
I think it was really about my work, and my attention really on a day-to-day basis is about helping people understand how distributed collaboration works, which affects data, it affects finances, it affects identity. And I really think it's sort of the current phase of what's happening as society restructures itself. So we used to have very centralized approaches because those were the easiest to build. We had the resources and the technology to do it. Now we're decentralizing and distributing that. And sometimes it works, sometimes it fails. But Bitcoin was a huge transition in that. And now a lot of us are saying, oh, look at that blockchain stuff. How it worked for Bitcoin. We can use it for different applications. And so that's what I wake up every day trying to figure out.
And is there a specific kind of use case or example that has particularly got your attention at the moment in this decentralization theme?
Yeah. The thing that's currently driving me is this idea of trying to understand how people evaluate and adopt new technologies. Part of my work with the Decentralized Identity Working Group was to develop a rubric for evaluating DID methods. And the reason we came up with a rubric was because the community, who had been working together for years, we had lots of good trust and lots of good faith amongst us, we couldn't come to a single defining term for the word decentralized that could work as a litmus test for a given DID method. A DID method provides the specific ways that you create, read, and update and deactivate these identifiers. And we had hoped that there might be a litmus test so we could say, hey, that DID method, it's just not decentralized. It doesn't qualify. But we couldn't come up with a single term. And the response to that was a rubric. And a rubric is basically a set of criteria that you evaluate against the subject. And our approach in this particular case was, look, different use cases, different people who are doing evaluations are going to have different reasons to judge the criteria differently. For example, if you're talking about a criteria about economics, then and your use case is dealing with refugees who typically don't have much money at all, it's going to be very different if you're dealing with a identity situation where you're talking about international executive travelers. You know, those guys do have money, and so they can afford different tools, different cost basis, different operational and maintenance expenses. So the ability to pick and choose the criteria that mattered to you was foundational for that work. And I really think it's an interesting new way just to try and understand what's important. It started collaboratively because we were a community trying to figure out a particular requirement for our work, and it has, to me, I've realized that it's the crowdsourcing aspect of developing the rubric that was so valuable. You know, I'm not the sole expert on all these technologies. I don't know what all these different people who helped create the standard were thinking about. And as we've developed the rubric, I was able to talk to them and get their input, to have arguments sometimes, you know, pretty loud arguments. But we were able to tease out, oh, when you think about decentralized systems, you care about anti-censorship. And someone else, when they think about distributed systems, they care about financial inclusion, for example. And those are different. They have some overlaps, but I guess that's it. I mean, it's this idea of the rubric being crowdsourced to solve real problems is different. It's not really how we've ever solved that kind of problem before.
Now, this sounds like a really very generic problem and perhaps a generic solution, because so much of the issues that we face, particularly as we're developing technologies, are around trying to get a shared understanding of the world and a shared definition of what we're talking about. And so much of our time, I think, is spent not necessarily understanding or not meaning the same thing. And that can apply whether it's in your personal relationship or in these technology development endeavors, to global policy around anything, or how we make decisions in the workplace. So, you know, what are the criteria, and do we have a shared understanding of these definitions? So this seems like really very generic and very broadly applicable.
I think it is. You know, one of the things that we do at Rebooting the Web of Trust, where I'm one of the past producers, past facilitator, and I'm on the board, we get together for a week. Used to be every 6 months. COVID kind of interrupted that. But the point was to write something together. So it could be code, it could be a paper. But the key was creating a shared artifact. And what that shared artifact did was it allowed not only the collaborators who were at the workshop to develop a shared understanding and some shared definitions, because we would argue about terms and what does this mean, or how are we going to start this conversation? But then we got to publish it. And the publication allowed us to do proofreading and editing and make something that would actually be usable outside of that context of the intimacy of that in-group that developed it. So we definitely see that effort as a way to establish shared understanding and shared definition. A rubric is another way to do it if it were socially created. You know, rubrics are used in education all the time, and they're not crowdsourced, right? It's the folks who are in charge of curriculum who are saying, hey, a student needs to be able to name all 50 US states in a class on US history or something like that. And so we just shifted it a little bit because we had this collaborative mindset. We were coming from an open standards-based effort where people are coming together to try and figure out how do we set global standards so that we can interoperate. So it came out of a crowdsourcing notion. And so I like that you picked that up. I mean, that's really what it's about.
I remember one of the earlier meetings. So we were meeting in the Rebooting Web of Trust workshop since 2015, and a bunch of technologists. And I think in one of the workshops, someone suggested that we all sit around and co-edit a Google Doc. And I think it was still quite a novel idea. I think, like these days, with the way that we're all working remotely and so on, it's kind of second nature. But it was a big aha. It was like, oh yeah, we can all sit with our computers open and we can all be editing the same document. And that may seem chaotic, but actually it was helpful to all get on the same page, quite sort of literally. And I think you're right. Developing these artifacts is really key, because then we've got something to build on and we've got something to reference. It's a bit like how ants build ant heaps. You know, they lay down one grain of sand at a time, and then the next one can come along, put one left, right, or on the or above the last one. And the emergent property of that is an ant heap. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. So when you're talking about rubrics and the work that you're doing here, you're obviously building something. You want to just say a word or two about that and how that might shift people's thinking or maybe raise some questions in our last couple of minutes here, because I think this is a really important idea.
Sure. Our most active work right now is working with did method creators and did method users to do evaluations of did methods. So our first rubric, we published some example evaluations of a handful of did methods. And then we have, for one of our clients, on behalf of Digital Bazaar, who's working with the Department of Homeland Security, we did a full evaluation of the Verus1 method. And now we're also working on a couple of others, and when we publish those, we'll make them public. And part of that is developing a tool to make it easier to deal with these types of discussions. When the first time we did it for Verus1, we were just basing it on the published documents that we did through W3C. So we had a Google Doc and we could edit that, but it really was tedious keeping track of the numbering. We had a collaborative framework, but it wasn't really easy to navigate, and it wasn't really made for a conversational mechanism. So we're building this in-house tool, which hopefully, in a year or two may become a software as a service that would help other people evaluate did methods against the rubrics, and to be able to share those criteria that they've come up with, to be able to share evaluations that they've come up with. And we see that there's a potential there for something that's kind of like a Wikipedia, but it's all about did methods, and specifically through the lens of criteria and evaluations, which, because it's nicely structured, lends itself to comparing apples to apples. That's one of the big benefits of the rubric approach, is all the criteria you pick and choose. And when you combine evaluations of different methods, then you can get directly apples to apples. So on this criteria, these 5 did methods, well, he got an A, they got a B, they got an F, and you could piece by piece make sense of that.
Fantastic. Joe, just in the last breaths of this catalytic conversation, what is the catalytic idea or insight? What do you want to let people take home as the idea or message?
I want to say that the institutions that figure out how to optimize distributed collaboration are the ones who are going to succeed in the next era. It's not about optimizing space like it was in the age of the East India Company. It's not about optimizing time, which is really what the 20th century was all about, with minimum with time-based just about everything. Now, I really think figuring out whether we're looking at it in terms of blockchain, or we're looking at it in terms of IETF and ISO and other collaborative standards, those who figure out how to collaborate in a distributed way are going to do better than those who are sitting in their own room and thinking they're building the golden armchair, because it's just going to be an armchair to watch TV. It's not going to scale the way it would if you could figure out that distributed collaboration.
A great insight. Thank you so much, and look forward to further conversations.
Thank you, Sean. This was fun.
Excellent.